There are big Civil War movies everyone knows. These are not those. Cattle raids, prison camps, paranoia, survival, the war at ground level, not the polished version. From overlooked American dramas to rough Italian westerns, these are Civil War films you have probably never seen. Look, most people think Civil War movies are just guys standing in lines shooting, but Alvarez Kelly throws all that out the window. Instead, you get a massive western heist, and the loot isn't gold bars. It's 2,500 walking stakes. You've got William Holden playing the ultimate cynic, a cattleman who doesn't care about the North or the South. He only cares about the payout. Then he collides with Richard Widmark, a one-eyed Confederate colonel who knows he's losing the war, but refuses to let his men starve. So Widmark kidnaps him, and the mission becomes driving a massive herd straight through Union lines in 1864. It's based on the real beefsteak raid. And the movie captures the sweaty desperation of pulling it off. No glorious charges, just mud, exhaustion, and stampede stunts that look like they could actually kill the stuntman. It's practical, it's messy, and it proves hunger motivates men way more than flags ever will. If you want to see the Civil War stripped of every last ounce of honor, look at what the Italians did with it. They took Sergio Corbucci, the madman behind Django, and let him loose on the Hellbenders. This isn't a polite history lesson. It's a mean, sweaty nightmare. Joseph Cotton plays Colonel Jonas, a fanatical ex-Confederate who simply refuses to accept the war is over. So he drags his family through the brutal desert heat, hauling a coffin that isn't meant for a body. He's risking everything to smuggle it past Union patrols. Because what's inside that box is the key to restarting the entire war. Because this is Corbucci, the tone is pure spaghetti western nihilism. The violence hits fast, and the morality is completely gone. American studios were trying to be respectful, but this film treats the aftermath like a desperate, bloody heist. It captures the ugly insanity of a cause that refuses to stay dead. Clint Eastwood spent his career being the toughest guy in the room, so watching him get dismantled by a house full of Southern women in The Beguiled is genuinely disturbing. He plays a wounded Union soldier taken in by an isolated girls' boarding school. At first, he thinks he's working the angles, charming them, playing the fox in the hen house. But the vibe shifts fast. Directed by Don Siegel, the guy who made Dirty Harry, this isn't a romance. It's a suffocating nightmare full of candlelight, shadows, and repressed rage. Hospitality turns to jealousy, and the school transforms into a total snake pit. There is no glory here, just creeping paranoia, where the soldier realizes he isn't the guest of honor anymore. He's the prey. It proves that even Clint Eastwood can walk into a trap he isn't tough enough to break out of. Unified bloc fighting for the cause. But Free State of Jones takes a sledgehammer to that myth. This is a modern film, but it feels like 70s grit. You've got Matthew McConaughey playing Newton Knight, a Confederate medic who realizes he's fighting a rich man's war and a poor man's fight. So he deserts. But he doesn't just hide. He starts a counter-revolution deep in the Mississippi swamps. He does something that was supposed to be impossible in the 1860s. He builds an army of runaway slaves and poor white farmers, fighting side by side. They effectively secede from the Confederacy. The violence is ugly. Shotgun ambushes in the bayou, and hanging tax collectors. But the real tension is watching these two distinct groups learn to trust each other in the middle of a race war. And it shines a light on a crucial piece of Southern history that the textbooks usually try to erase. You see John Ford and John Wayne, you expect the bugles and the glory. But the Horse Soldiers isn't interested in that. Instead, you get a grind of a road movie that feels less like an adventure and more like a death sentence. Based on the real Grierson's raid, the mission is a suicide run deep behind Confederate lines to tear up railroad tracks. But the real battle happens inside the unit. The friction thrives between Wayne's hard-nosed colonel and William Holden's army surgeon. Holden thinks the war, and Wayne's brutal command style, is absolute insanity. Wayne plays this character darker than his usual hero myth. He's bitter, he hates doctors, and he knows he's feeding men into a meat grinder. The film forces you to focus on the medical cost of the fighting, clashing those beautiful Ford landscapes against the ugly reality of a field hospital. It's a genuinely underrated film that usually gets overshadowed by the Searchers. So if you haven't seen it, add it to your watch list. If you want pure tension without the special effects, you have to track down Pharaoh's army. This is a masterclass in what happens when you strip a story down to the bone and force the actors to carry the weight. The premise is painfully simple. A Union captain and his men occupy a remote Confederate woman's farm to raid her supplies, and then they just have to live there. Chris Cooper gives a grounded performance as the captain. A decent man forced to do indecent things just to keep his unit moving. He knows he is the villain in this family's story, and he hates it. The anxiety builds through small, tense details. Killing a single chicken, digging up buried corn while the starving family watches. It captures the sweaty, uneasy reality of occupation, where the enemy is not an army across a field. It is the people sitting across the table staring straight through you. It lands with a quiet, devastating weight. It feels real. It feels human, and it absolutely deserves a place on any serious Civil War watch list. Then you have Ang Lee's Ride with the Devil. Somehow, almost nobody showed up to watch the most accurate depiction of the Bushwhacker War ever put on film. This deals with the Missouri-Kansas border chaos, where neighbors were shooting neighbors in their front yards. You get Tobey Maguire and Jeffrey Wright in roles that demand total attention, speaking in archaic, formal dialogue that sounds like poetry. It makes the sudden, jagged violence feel even more disturbing. It strips away the North versus South uniformity and shows the messy, unorganized, personalized violence of irregular warfare. The winter scenes look freezing, the ambushes are abrupt, and it refuses to give you a clean moral victory. It is criminally overlooked. Easily the best Civil War film Hollywood ever buried. It's a masterpiece about how ideology eventually dissolves into simple survival. Most people remember Jimmy Stewart as the stuttering nice guy, but Shenandoah lets him be something much harder. He spends the first hour of this movie chomping a cigar at the head of the dinner table, basically telling the entire Civil War to stay the hell off his property. The film is fascinating because it explores the impossible dream of neutrality. Stewart plays a Virginia patriarch who thinks that just because he didn't vote for the conflict, he can opt out of it. But the war doesn't care about his politics. The turning point hits when his youngest son is mistaken for a soldier and kidnapped by Union troops. Stewart has to mount up to get him back. It bridges the gap between those old-school sentimental westerns and the darker, bloodier era that was just starting to creep in. You watch the war slowly close in on this man's family, not through malice, but through sheer, crushing inevitability. Shenandoah stands as one of the most overlooked Civil War films ever made, and Jimmy Stewart delivers one of his most underrated performances. We like to dress the Civil War up with brass bands and flags, but Andersonville doesn't give you any of that. It drags you straight into the dirt and leaves you there. For something made for television, the scale is surprisingly massive. They rebuilt the real Georgia prison camp with a level of detail that feels uncomfortable, and then filled it with starving Union prisoners who look like they've already given up. There's no hero moment waiting in this story. No victory charge, just disease, hunger, and men packed together under open sky waiting to die. And the worst part isn't the guards, it's what happens between the prisoners themselves. Inside those walls, a group called the Raiders takes control of whatever scraps are left. Food, supplies, anything valuable. Men who went in wearing uniforms start acting like animals, because survival becomes the only rule that matters. That's the real weight of Andersonville. It isn't about who was right or wrong. It's about what starvation, fear, and chaos do to human beings when there's nowhere to run. Andersonville is one of the toughest Civil War films to sit through, not because of gore, but because it shows how fast decency disappears when people are pushed past their breaking point. If you want a Civil War movie without polish, pride, or nostalgia, Andersonville isn't just worth watching. It's one you won't forget. We end with A Time for Killing, and it's the harshest film on the list. The story takes place in the final stretch of the Civil War, where the fighting should be slowing down, but the tension feels sharper, meaner, and more personal than ever.
Is there some reason why the prisoner refuses to stand?
Yes, Colonel, there is. You might be commander of this here fort. You're down south. You wouldn't be fit to Told guts to a coon dog.
A young Harrison Ford shows up early in his career, and Glenn Ford gives a performance that feels weathered and burned out. Everything on screen looks tired. The terrain is dry, the uniforms are worn to threads, and every character moves like the war has already taken what mattered. There's no hero's journey here, no moral lesson, just a stubborn, relentless pursuit driven by anger, fatigue, and pride. The violence lands with a hollow thud, like even the people pulling the triggers know there's nothing left to prove. That's the power of A Time for Killing. It doesn't give you a clean ending or a sense of closure. It shows a war that keeps moving out of habit long after the purpose is gone. A Time for Killing may not be famous, but it deserves a place in the conversation, because few Civil War films are willing to show how hard it is for hate to stop when the war already has. Thanks for watching. If you want more forgotten films like these, subscribe to VintageVerse and stick around. There's a lot more cinema history left buried.